following program is from NET, the National Educational Television Network.
Carnival in Brazil.
Well, you ain't gonna never
3 days
get it.
and 4
So I'll
nights
just
of
tell you.
national frenzy.
You ready?
Sergeant,
I got it.
pagan and Christian.
I woke
The
up
music
with
and
it this
dance.
morning.
Is it contagious?
Oh, you know what I mean.
Black
I got the number for the day.
Carnival symbolizes Brazil's reputation as a racial paradise.
My name is Ossie Davis. The experience of the Negro in Brazil and the rest of Latin America has been different than ours. So different that where we are caught up in a struggle, often it accompanied by racial strife, Brazil has been described as a racial paradise. What has been the experience of the 30 million Negroes in Brazil? Has Brazil solved the crises that plague our country? And can we learn something from Brazilians that can provide us with answers to our American dilemma? In our History of the Negro People series, we came to Brazil to explore these questions. Jorge Amado, perhaps the leading Brazilian novelist, told us,
Eu creio que o Brasil é país onde está se dando processo talvez único no mundo.
I believe that Brazil is a country where a process, which is perhaps unique in the world, is taking place. It is a melting pot of peoples and races that is someday going to reach a point where you won't be able to talk anymore about pure white or pure black. Our experience differs fundamentally not only from North America, but from all other countries. It is unique because it is an experience of the mixing of races, the mixing of blood. Here next to me is Marilda Alves, a movie actress, a Brazilian mulatto beauty who herself demonstrates the very positive results of the blending of the races. And the reasons for the Brazilian experience lie in our past, our history.
Brazil in 1500 was a wild and primitive land of savage animals. And the cannibalistic Indian, oldest inhabitant of the New World, predating both Portuguese and Negro by more than 1,000 years. In 1500, a Portuguese ship blown off its course arrived in Brazil. Colonists soon followed. Many were adventurers and criminals. To most, this barbaric country was a place of exile. The Portuguese came with no experience in farming and a
you know what? Let
distaste
me
for work.
check, because I don't remember getting
A Renaissance humanist wrote, "If there are any people more given to laziness than the Portuguese, I do not know where it exists."
No.
Slavery seemed a convenient answer. The Portuguese attacked and massacred the Indian.
I did. Good.
And made
I was
him the
hoping
first
so.
slave
Danny
in the
got
New
so
World.
much work to do. I was like, oh man, I can't even go see him, but I'll get you on the next
But the
one.
Indians
You know,
failed
now look,
to meet
that's
the
how I was
rigid
thinking, is that
qualifications for
something else
slaves
I'm
in the
different
16th
for?
century. They died by the thousands. A Spanish friar, Bartolomé de las Casas, gave up his land and slaves and returned to Spain, where he begged the Spanish regent for an end to the enslavement and slaughter of the Indians throughout Latin America. To save the Indians, Las Casas suggested an alternative candidate, the hardier African Negro. In Africa itself, slavery, both black and white, was not new. Arab traders and African priests had been buyers and sellers of slaves for thousands of years. Now the Portuguese took over. For these Africans, the Muslims, the Bantus, and the Sudanese, the trip over was the beginning of a tragic future. From 30 to 40 days, they crossed the South Atlantic. These sailing clippers were known as coffins. The slaves were kept in the hold from 5 in the afternoon until 8 in the morning in darkness. The loss of human cargo ran as high as 70%. When they arrived in Brazil, they were cataloged and sold. First, they were sent to the sugar plantation, for sugar was the unchallenged king of Brazil for many years. Then, gold was discovered, and the Negro worked in the gold mines of the New World. There was also a great demand for skilled artisans. Life was harsh. Almost any offense committed would result in whippings with a twisted raw leather hide. More serious crimes warranted more sophisticated punishments, such as fastening the slave for several days by his ankles or his arms. In 1607, a group of Negroes revolted, the first of many uprisings. But the Negro was more assimilated in colonial Brazil than in North America. He was welcomed into the Catholic Church, where he was baptized and married. And the white colonist and Negro slave lived together intimately. Black nannies brought up the children. The Portuguese adapted African cooking. And the men who did not bring wives with them took on the Negro women as concubines, sometimes even married them. On May 8th, 1888, the Chamber of Deputies drew up an abolition bill as most Brazilians began to realize that slavery was doomed. Crowds gathered below as the debate raged inside. On May 13th, the Princess Regent banished slavery from Brazil as thousands of Brazilians roared their approval. Emancipation took 23 years longer, but one war less than in North America. Professor Marvin Harris is the chairman of the Department of Anthropology at Columbia University and an expert on race relations in Brazil.
After 1888, there was no history in Brazil of the type of Jim Crow, sharp racial struggle, race riots, lynchings, public discrimination, public transportation, and in schools, just nothing comparable to it. The whole trajectory of experience in Brazil between the races has been a much milder sort of experience.
Today, the majority of Brazilians, it is said, are the descendants of masters or slaves. The Casa Grande, or big house, still survives. Inside the house, the descendants of a Portuguese master still gather for Sunday dinner. The family silver and crystal are almost the last vestiges of a more elegant past. Although the days of master and slave are gone, the children still enjoy some aspects of the old Casa Grande life. They ride their horses, as they have done for generations, through the fields of sugar cane, where Negroes still work as their slave ancestors did, but now for a salary of under $10 a week. These Negroes, like the white family in the Casa Grande, hold on to their old traditions, African traditions. A few miles away is the city of Salvador, the first capital of Brazil, in the province of Bahia. Salvador was the biggest port of entry of slaves from Africa in the Western Hemisphere. Few people in this city can be sure they're not just a little black. More than 50% of the population is of mixed ancestry. Many whites in Salvador would be classified as mulatto in the United States. Brazilians call Bahia a velha mulata, the old mulatto woman. Dr. Gilberto Freyre, former member of the National Assembly and former ambassador to the United Nations, is Brazil's greatest historian.
The influence of the Negro in Brazilian life is immense, both historical and at present, when the presence of the Negro is everywhere in Brazilian culture, in what is most characteristic in Brazilian culture. You find that Brazilians now are even proud of the fact that they have a Brazilian cookery that's considered by some to be the rival cookery of the French one and of the Chinese one. They are proud of the fact that this very characteristic Brazilian cookery has many traits of African influence. In fact, if it were not for this great African influence, there would not be a Brazilian cookery.
Capoeira, another African tradition. Once a way of fighting between slaves with razors strapped to their ankles, has slowly changed until now it is a ritual dance accompanied by African instruments. The dancers keep in time to the rhythm
I'll make sure it's
as they attack each other with hands, feet,
All right, love
and
you too.
head,
Talk to you later.
just stopping short of
Bye,
landing
Maya.
a blow.
Love you. Mwah.
But the greatest African influence is its people.
Love you.
This woman is known simply as Olga.
All right, good.
She lives in
Man,
the slums
school
of
already?
Salvador. Many of the people who live in these slums are of mixed blood, and some would even pass for white.
What kind of school is that? What kind of summer is that?
Olga lives in this house. She has 8 children. The oldest boy works for the federal government. Laurel, who is 21, is an electrician and mechanic. The other children pick up work wherever they can. But Olga is not simply a housewife. She is the high priestess of the candomblé. Candomblé, practiced in Bahia, was originally an African fetish cult brought by slaves and altered by time, but still essentially African.
E tem também para dizer a vocês, o passado da minha família.
People come to me because of sickness, because of setbacks, because of spiritual persecutions. They come for many reasons and they kneel on the ground and try to feel that sense of personal exaltation.
As priestess, Olga has profound responsibilities as moral and spiritual leader. At a consultation, this woman asks Olga to help her sick daughter. Olga must divine the spirit's orders, and in the reading of her shells, she finds the prescription for this woman's troubles. Olga and her followers called Daughters of the Saints, are preparing for the traditional dance of the candomblé. Roosters and chickens are sacrificed to the spirits, their blood rubbed against a holy tree. Herbs are gathered, and African songs are sung in the original African tongue, Yoruba. Special foods are prepared to offer the spirits. It is the night of the candomblé, the climax of religious activity for Olga and her followers. Many of the participants and spectators are white. They find in candomblé a vitality lacking in their own church. Olga's candomblé is matriarchal. Men participate only as spectators and musicians. Believers are assigned a special saint, similar to those worshipped in many parts of Africa. In the music and dance, they hope that he will enter their bodies. They yearn to be possessed. At the time of possession, it is said the saint descends into the head, and through the body, he dances and talks. Then the daughter of the saint dances in a trance. Possession is complete. But if Olga is an African priestess, she is also a Catholic. She sees no conflict between the Catholic Church and the worship of her African ancestors. The saints of candomblé are fused with the saints of Catholicism.
If African tradition is still strong in Brazil, it is also changing. It is absorbing and being absorbed with the religion and tradition of Catholic Brazil. Many of the people who attend its vivid ceremony come as spectators rather than converts, and the younger generation of Negroes is little interested in its values. They are less concerned with their past as Africans and more with their future as Brazilians and as Negroes. Olga's son Laurel prefers soccer to the African capoeira. But though he works and plays with whites, he is fearful about the future.
I have been handicapped by my color in many things, in jobs, at parties, in many little ways that are hard to relate. I would prefer that my wife would be lighter than I, because I would like to have lighter children. If I marry lighter and have children who look more white, they will have more opportunity to get ahead in life. I want the best for my children. I don't want them to suffer the disappointments I did because of my color.
Professor Thales de Azevado is an anthropologist at the University of Bahia. We ask him about racial discrimination in Brazil.
It's very easily seen that the Negroes have been retained in a very low position in our society, which is due to discrimination all through our history by the means of these devices which I have mentioned formerly, the Negroes are not accepted in some schools, in some jobs. We have practically no Negroes in the higher ranks of the army, in the clergy. At least we have no bishop who is a Negro. We have priests, but no bishops. And in the private schools, sometimes they are not accepted. At least they are not accepted in the proportion that they exist in the population. I think these are the means through which we discriminate against them. They may rise individually, but not as a group.
A discriminação racial, a meu ver,
the prejudice that exists in Brazil, as I see it, is a discrimination of color. So much so that people who are descended from Negroes, but have lighter skin and finer features, pass for white. Those with darker skin have more difficulty than those with lighter skin. The Brazilian, in general, doesn't have racial prejudice. He has color prejudice.
Professor Harris, do Brazilian Negroes have the same emotional and psychological problems as American Negroes?
My experience is that Brazilians are not troubled by the question of who they are racially to the extent that many Americans are. The reason there, the explanation of that, I believe, is because Brazilians have a chance of changing their racial identity during their lifetimes.
And how is this done?
Well, one way to do it is to improve one's job, get a better job, get a better education, make some money. As a matter of fact, there's a saying which goes, money whitens.
Money whitens in Brazil means that if a Negro is wealthy enough and well educated, he can share the advantages of Brazil's upper class whites. He is not even called a Negro. There are no whites-only signs anywhere, but Negroes are tacitly excluded from many places. Social segregation is the unwritten rule. Yet, if money whitens, few Negroes have much money. The favelas, or slums, do not discriminate. The houses are built out of wood, cardboard, and scrap metal. Of the thousands who live in these favelas, a large number are Negro. The hillsides on which the slums have sprung up have no electricity, no sewers, or paved roads. Whatever enters the favela is carried in by hand and by foot. Yet, the favela is not a ghetto. People live here not just because they are colored, but because they are poor. It is possible for the Negro to educate himself and move out, and he can also marry out.
My daughter is married to a white man, and she has no problem at all. She's very light-skinned, you know. And of course, she has 3 children now, and they're almost white.
Yes, I have Negro blood through my father. My great-grandfather was a mulatto. I looks like a white man. Nobody ever said to me that I'm a mulatto or I'm not a white man. And if I were a mulatto, perhaps I should not care about that. Why care?
As you know, passing in the United States is a shame, is a technique unaccepted and rejected by both parties. Both the white and the Negroes, they reject the one who tries to pass. While in Brazil, passing is a common thing.
It's rare now to find a Negro of the pure dark type in Brazil. It's possible to find it, but it's very difficult because race mixture has been, miscegenation has been in Brazil, as you know, a process very much generalized. And the result of this that the different intermediate types of race mixture are numerous in Brazil, and the survivals of pure Negro types very scarce, very rare.
We too in the United States have had miscegenation. One has but to take an objective view of the Negro in prominent positions in the leadership of the integration movement here in the United States to realize that many of these people are not, by Brazilian standards, Negro at all. We have a system, however, of reckoning racial identity which does not tolerate any intermediate status. Hence, we are faced here with a choice of being either Negro or white. This is a biologically inappropriate and foolish type of categorization, at least from the point of view of genetics and anthropology. I think it's quite reasonable to predict that if things go on as they have been going on in Brazil for another century or so, we can expect that both whites and Negroes will disappear. And my own feeling on this subject is why not? Because the resulting mixture will take its place among bona fide racial groups of the world. All the racial groups of the world that we know of are mixed groups. There are no pure races.
The Negro from abroad cannot comprehend us. He finds a Negro race which is intermixing with the white, and a new race is emerging. At first, he thinks this is a subtle form of prejudice, because the Negro is disappearing. But then, it would also be a subtle form of prejudice against the white, because the white man, as such, is disappearing also. But even if the Negro vanishes eventually as a pure race in Brazil, his influence and his mark on us are deep. We are convinced we are taking the right path, and that racial democracy may really be Brazil's great contribution to a universal humanistic culture.